So can you tell us a little bit about your connection to Fort Meade, your family's connection?
Okay, my grandparents came out from Baltimore in 1900 and settled on now, which is the Patuxent Refuge. They had the land until January 1941. Okay, my grandfather died in 1913, so I left the land to my father basically, and his brother went in the First World War. Of course, my father stayed, and he left in 1929. The house stayed vacant, and then in 1941 they took over the farm, the government, and their house was the main place for the Army. They took over.
Right.
And he started business down in Nottington.
What business did he start?
He had a little country store, and he kept a lot of people going to the Depression and all that, He has a good reputation down there.
All right.
Yeah, did a good job.
I think I saw a document in there. How much did they sell that? I think it was 127 acres. How much did they sell?
172 acres.
170. How much did they sell that to the government for in 1941?
$7,238.
All right. That's a pretty good deal.
Pretty good deal back
Pretty
then,
good deal.
yeah.
All right.
A lot of money.
What other connections have you had to Fort Meade over the years? Have you worked there?
I worked at the post office from 60 to 68. And my brothers all worked at NSA, of course. I had a father-in-law and Admiral Falls were the first two to run NSA from 60 to 64. So that's my connection.
All right.
So quite a bit.
Fantastic. Now, do you have any other memories associated with the old place, or
yeah,
any of that?
Because it was open fort then. They could go through half a dozen gates, but now you limit it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Levy. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Doreen Downs Carey, but you also have a relationship to the Disney family that was part of Fort Meade also, right?
Well, my grandfather's name was Richard Disney Downs, and his mother was a Disney lady.
Okay.
And so, they were the Downses and the Disneys. The Disneys were everywhere.
Right.
They were a lot.
I want to tell you a little story about my oldest brother was doing some research on the Reeve family in Germany. Found out we have a cousin named Hans Otto who served in the German Navy and was captured. And he was a prisoner of war at Fort Meade, not knowing, of course, that he had relatives about 3 miles away. We didn't know that he was a prisoner of war. And then he was transferred to the prisoner of war camp at Arizona and was repatriated back to Germany after the war ended, World War II.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So, your family's land made up Fort Meade where he was being held a prisoner. That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
Appreciate
you're
it.
welcome.
And descended from the Farrell family. And they were the original from over around the Patuxent area and back of Fort Meade. And that's from the history that I've been told from my parents and the times we discussed it. They were old farmers that way. My grandfathers and great-grandfathers were tobacco farmers.
Any stories that you remember about the government coming in and taking their land? Do they remember that? And were they a little bit bitter or anything about losing the property?
No, there was never any. From my mother and my grandparents were gone when I was pretty young. They were all, I guess, content to make their contributions. That's just part of the way things were done.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Hood. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Slowly, uniforms are being issued out. I just got this jacket today. Before that, we were just training in flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up. It's getting a little warm out, but and canvas leggings. But I hear once we get over to France, we'll be wearing wool canvas, wool leggings to keep the mud out of boots.
Right. What has there been about Army life that surprised you so far?
Very, very, very vigorous. A lot of moving, a lot of training, and recently a lot of going on at Camp Meade with building new structures and using arms from 15, 20 years ago. So using outdated stuff to train with.
Yeah. Yeah. What about your non-commissioned officers? Are they a good group of men?
Yeah, I would say generally so. generally so.
Yeah. How about your officers?
Well, they're tough, but I guess that's what their job is.
Right. Right. Have you gotten a chance to go home since when did you arrive, by the way?
I arrived last week.
Okay. So, where's your folks? Where are your family?
Philadelphia, right outside of
In
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. All right. So you probably aren't going to get any leave anytime soon.
Not
will you?
anytime soon, but hopefully, at some point before I go over there.
All
have a
right.
weekend.
Good. So are you making some good friends in the unit?
Yeah, so far, making a couple of close people. We got to stay in contact with somebody once we get over there, and then hopefully we all stick together and make it.
Right. Well, when you guys aren't training and getting ready, what kinds of things are you doing in the evenings or on a little bit of time off you might get?
Every now and then there are dances. The YMCA has a fantastic programs going on. It's really marvelous.
Well, that's great. Well, I got to end this interview by asking you just how good is that Army chow?
It's good, all right.
All right. Thank you very much, Private.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you all for being here today on behalf of the Community Covenant Council and our chair, Tim O'Farrell, and the Epiphany Episcopal Church and its minister, Phoebe McPherson, who you'll be hearing from later. My real job is just to turn the program over to our Master of Ceremonies, but I have to say, this is a gentleman whose deep love of history is evidenced by his PhD from the University of Southern California. His deep appreciation and affection for Fort Meade is evidenced by his time as commander and the fact that he's chosen to remain in the Fort Meade region and continue to contribute, as he currently does as the Senior Director of Cyber and Aerospace for the State's Department of Commerce. So he's bringing in the businesses that will help today's Fort Meade in its cyber mission. So our Master of Ceremonies, Colonel Kenneth O. McCready.
See if we can do this without falling. No lightning bolts coming down on the pulpit on me. We've been thinking about this event for about 3 years as we've been planning the centennial observance of Fort Meade. We wanted to make sure that we didn't forget the people whose land made up Camp Meade, who rather abruptly, when a decision was made in June to put a camp here, by July construction began. So people didn't have a whole lot of time to vacate their homes. Their crops just were left in the field. The apple trees were starting to bear fruit, and they all had to pick up and leave. So as we celebrate what Fort Meade has become and how important it is, not only in this region, but to our nation and to our allies, we thought it was appropriate in this centennial to pause and remember those families who really made a tremendous sacrifice for the nation. So that's the purpose of today's events. I wanted to recognize some special guests, some elected officials and partners. First, Sarah Boltersdorf and Sheena Jones from the Odenton Regional Library. They may be still out manning their table, I don't know. They're trying to sell subscriptions there. Nancy Schaff. Nancy, could you stand up? Nancy is a member of the Maryland World War I Centennial Commission, but more importantly, her grandfather was a member of the 314th Infantry Regiment, which was one of the regiments that formed the 79th Division that came here to Camp Meade, trained, and then deployed to the battlefields of France. So Nancy has done a tremendous amount of work to keep the memory of the 314th alive, but also for all of us to remember the doughboys and their families and their loved ones that formed in 1917 and went to the battlefields of France in 1918. Katie Sari, the associate pastor from Nichols Bethel United Methodist Church, is with us. Katie, so nice to have you. And Reverend Sari will be participating in the program a little bit. Just to quickly note, Nichols Bethel United Methodist Church right up the road on 175 was originally located on land that became part of Camp Meade. So the church was displaced off of Camp Meade, and adjacent to the post cemetery is the Bethel Methodist Church Cemetery that is a reminder of the church's presence on Camp Meade, Fort Meade. And finally, I'd like to recognize Lisa Terry. Lisa, can you stand up? She's from the Howard County Office of Veterans and Military Families and does a tremendous lot of work, not only in Howard County, but throughout the state on behalf of the military and military families. So thank you, Lisa. Finally, I'd like to recognize over here in these pews, and you didn't realize this is a choir loft, so you all will be performing a solo later on. I'd like to. Oh, excellent, good. Well, you're the lead singer then. I'd like to introduce William Byron Phelps and Kevin Hood. Could you both stand as you're able? They're descendants of William Farrell, who owned property on Camp Meade and gave it up. Mr. William Byron Phelps here is 91 years old, a veteran of World War II, and so we're thrilled to have both he and Mr. Hood here today to celebrate the sacrifices of Mr. Farrell. I'd like to recognize Carl Reeve and Theodore Reeve. Can you both stand up? Thank you very much. The Reeves are descendants of Theodore Reeve. Reeve Pond is now part of the Patuxent Wildlife Reserve, so it's part of Fort Meade that was returned to the government, to the Fish and Wildlife Service right before, well, in the BRAC of 1995. Their land, actually, though, was acquired by the government in 1941, just before World War II broke out, as part of an expansion of Fort Meade that was required to do artillery training, tank training, and that kind of thing, as the 1st Infantry, or the 29th Infantry Division trained here before being deployed. So thank you, gentlemen. We have Harry Farrell Jr., who was related to Harry Farrell Sr. Harry Farrell Jr., can you, right here, sir. Thank you. Another Farrell. Prolific family, undoubtedly. Or you didn't get too far, one or the other. We're honored to have you here today. And finally, Doreen Disney Downs. Doreen, you want to stand up? Doreen shares the name of two families who were displaced, the Disneys and the Downs. So at some point, they got back together, and you would have had quite a fiefdom if you combine all the land that you all had once had. But we're thrilled to have you here, and as we share stories, you find out those continuing connections. Doreen's mother worked at the fort. I think you said your grandmother worked at the fort. Your sister, you worked at the fort and still work there. So the fort didn't completely abandon the Disneys and the Downs. It just changed the trajectory of some lives. So we're honored to have you here. Is there someone that I missed? I see some more people here and I don't have your names. Sir.
Yeah, I'm connected with the Farrells as well. This is my uncle.
Oh, okay.
And I'm also connected with the Wattses.
All right.
They're down here at the end of the street, and my grandfather had a grocery store up here in the corner. My father was a postmaster at Fort Meade for a number of years between the late 50s and the early 70s.
Wonderful. Well, we're honored to have you here, sir. I know there's a familiar face here. You want to tell us your connection?
My name's Cameron Watts. My father and mother, grandfather, grandmother, everybody lived at Fort Meade, or Admiral as it was called then. And my father and I both worked at the post office in Fort Meade for Dougie's father, who was a postmaster.
Right.
Some others before that, and all my people are in Bethel Cemetery. So.
Great. Well, once again, thank you for being here. There's some great family names that are present and still remembered today on post. So we're indeed honored to have you here. you're going to meet them later on, but I also want to introduce Colonel Tom Rickard and Sergeant Major Cullen, the post commander and post command sergeant major that have joined us today, and you're going to hear a little more from Colonel Rickard in a bit. So with that, I think we'll keep the ceremony moving forward. I'd like to ask Reverend Sari to please come forward and do the invocation. Please rise.
Let us pray. Oh God, thank you for this opportunity to be here together today. Thank you for this chance to celebrate the descendants of those whose land made possible Fort Meade. We ask your blessings on them. We ask your blessings on all the men and women connected to the fort and the good work that they do there. May we remember that you are with us always, seeking to bless us and to give us strength to live good lives in this world. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please remain standing for the presentation of the colors and the singing of the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. As they went out the door, I'd also like to recognize the honor guard from the 704th Military Intelligence Brigade at Fort Meade who presented the colors, and Staff Sergeant Kyra White from the U.S. Army Field Band who performed the national anthem. Let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to have the members of Beck's Philadelphia Band please stand for us. Beck's Band, I like to think of as Meade's own. They perform at ceremonies honoring General Meade in Philadelphia, work with the Meade Society there, and I met them there and told them what we were doing, and they said they wanted to be part of this. And here they are, they've come down from Philadelphia, from New Jersey, and joined us here today to maintain that connection to George Gordon Meade, the hero of Gettysburg. So thank you for being here today. Andy Waskey, has he been able to join us yet? Don't think so. The last person I'd like to recognize, Patrick, could you stand up? Patrick is our doughboy. And he looks like the doughboys that would have reported here in 1917. You're about the same age as those selectees would have been. So we're thrilled to have you here today. Thank you, Patrick. It's now my honor to introduce Colonel Thomas Rickard. I was trying to remember, they told us how many post commanders there were, and I couldn't remember which number we were. But we're in the 80s somewhere, I think, up there. And you know, the really amazing thing was we all kept getting better looking as we went through that. So, you know, who knows what Tom's successor is going to look like? Cover of Vogue or something. Colonel Tom Rickard is an infantry officer who served with distinction in the various theaters of war in the Joint War on Terror. He's commanded Fort Meade for almost a year and a half now. And I know for him the time is flying by because I remember those days, and it's pretty amazing. So it's my honor to introduce Colonel Tom Rickard to bring you the greetings of Fort Meade.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Can you hear me okay in the very back? I've not been in the pulpit much. I'm usually where you're sitting, so this is good. Although I was confirmed in an Episcopal church about this size, but certainly not with this stature. So I want to say thanks to everyone who has made today possible. There's too many people to thank, but especially to the Community Covenant Council, to Kim McCready, especially in the Epiphany Episcopal Church. A round of applause for them for putting it all together today. And as Ken mentioned, I'm graced by my predecessors, so there's many commanders who have come before me who have done tremendous things with the land that was so gratefully received by the U.S. government. And so I'm just grateful to be part of a long chain of commanders who have tried to make use of that tremendous investment of treasure and national resource into our national history. And so I'm just grateful to be part of that long chain. I want to say thanks to all the descendants that are here today, the many families that are here represented, and we know that there are many more members who couldn't be here today. But the family names, Disney, Farrell, Friedhofer, Downs, Phelps, Wagner, Plummer, Clark, Warfield, Sauerhammer, Harmon, Reeve, Watts, and many others that are associated with the great investment that was made in the summer of 1917. What I came here today to tell you the most is thanks, and it was worth the sacrifice. Thanks, and it was worth the sacrifice, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the government has done with your land that you had to leave for the government in order to win the Great War, and then to go on and win World War II, and to go on to make our nation great. And so, with that, this chapel is actually part of that history too. I think this is the only known World War I chapel in the U.S. that I'm aware of. Dedicated also the summer of 1918, I think about a year after Camp Meade was getting undergone with its construction. And so also very much part of the history. But since that time, since you had to give up that land, or your ancestors gave up that land, we've done much with it. We have grown successfully over the years from small amounts of people moving doughboys out to World War I and moving soldiers out to World War II with the waxing and waning of the population that goes between those years. And then come the 1950s, a small organization called the National Security Agency posted up on land that I think some of that is, I think it's the Sauerhammer's land. Some of that is where they are now, as well as some other folks. So there's a small footprint of the NSA that's there at Camp Meade, or now Fort Meade. And then we kept growing from there. And so we've grown, as you've known throughout the years, to now have about 118 different partner organizations and tenants at Fort Meade. And Fort Meade is now home to about 56,000 people, which is a fairly large footprint. We are the third largest installation in the U.S. Army, right behind Fort Hood and Fort Bragg. And a lot of people don't understand that, but that's the truth. And most of us at Fort Meade are probably more than half DoD civilians who are working every day to make America wonderful. And then we have a joint population, and so I'm very grateful for the 704th for doing the color guard today, and also for Staff Sergeant White from the Army Field Band. But we're more than just the Army at Fort Meade now today. I'm only about a third Army, I'm about a third Air Force, and about a third Navy plus Marine, and I've got 40 Coasties serving. But what it means is that your land has become the home to the nation's platform for information, intelligence, and cyber operations. That's what it's become. And the importance of the horse and the importance of the vehicle that we saw in the 19th and 20th century is now equitable to the importance of cyber operations in the 21st century and beyond. And so what your land has done now is provided a home that is going to be the center of gravity for our national security for years to come. And that is the synthesis of cyber and intelligence and information operations. And so please know that your land has become an important part of our national history and is part of our national future. And so it wouldn't have happened if we have not started in World War I with what you had. And no one then probably could have seen what it would become today, but we're grateful for the opportunity to have a home here at Fort Meade that used to be Admiral, nestled in a great part of Maryland in Arundel County. So we're just grateful to be part of that rich history, part of the tradition. And I want to say thanks again to everyone that was able to make this happen today. It's a powerful event. And Ken, I'm very grateful for your leadership making it happen. Thank you.
While we're saying thank you to, I'd like to recognize the folks on the committee that really made this happen. Linda Green was the driver. Linda, stand up. Denise Noe. Denise back there. Nancy Stryker. Nancy? Okay. Shauna Donahue back there. Raj from the West County, now the Central Maryland Chamber of Commerce. Thank you. And I know there's lots of other people. Oh yeah. I was waiting for that. And my wife, Leanne McCready, who great help. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to carry you back in time. 101 years ago, the presidential campaign was in full fury with President Woodrow Wilson running for a second term, opposed by Theodore Roosevelt, and William Howard Taft. Both wanted to bring him down and get America into war more rapidly. Wilson ran on a slogan, "He kept us out of war," and he was reelected in November 1916 to a second term in office. Wilson thought he could bring peace and broker a deal, and he made overtures to both the Allies and the Central Powers and was rebuffed. By the end of January 1917, the Germans declared unrestricted submarine warfare. That meant that any ship sailing toward Europe, sailing toward the British Isles, was fair game for German submarines. And ships flying the American flag as well as other neutral nations began to be sunk at an alarming rate. A few weeks after unrestricted submarine warfare was declared, the newspapers published a huge expose revealing that the Germans had secured a deal with the nation of Mexico for Mexico to intervene if the U.S. intervened, and the Germans promised them that they could regain the land that they lost in the Mexican-American War in 1846. That was called the Zimmerman Telegram. We know now that British intelligence was responsible for getting that telegram and for disseminating it because it certainly served their purpose. But between the unrestricted submarine warfare, the sinking of our ships, and the Zimmerman Telegram, the U.S. public opinion had begun to turn. And the slogan, "He kept us out of war," seemed so outdated as almost everyone in the nation could see that we were marching towards war. In April 1917, President Wilson appeared before a joint session of Congress and requested a declaration of war against the Central Powers. Congress debated for 5 days and then voted to declare war on Germany and Austria and Turkey. The challenge was the U.S. Army at that point was 133,000 men. That was about what the British were losing every week on the Somme battlefields. So clearly, in order to participate in the Great War, we had to create an army of millions, and we had to do it fairly rapidly. Initially, the War Department and the President believed that people would flock to the colors and that they wouldn't have to do a draft. Within several weeks, it was clear that that wasn't happening, and that a Selective Service Act was required. Now remember, for these people, the draft riots of the Civil War were still fresh in their memories. It's been less time between 1917 and the end of the Civil War than for us and the end of World War II. So it puts it in perspective. People remembered the Civil War, and they remembered the things that had happened there. So Congress and the President were loath to do the Selective Service Act, but it became apparent that they had to. So they passed that in May of 1917. And that called for the creation of 8 National Army divisions and the mobilization of 8 National Guard divisions. To do that, they needed 16 cantonment areas around the United States to bring those troops, to muster them in and get them ready to deploy, to train and prepare. There was a group of boosters from Anne Arundel County, led by Congressman Charles Linthicum, who thought western Anne Arundel County would be the perfect place. It was served by 3 rail lines, close proximity to the Port of Baltimore, close enough to the national capital that the Army brass and politicians could come up and see what was going on in one of these cantonment areas. It was fairly sparsely settled. Despite the folks that are here, there weren't all that many folks in this area. So the impact would be minimized in the grand scheme of things. So they made their case to the War Department, and a month later, it was announced that the Admiral site in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, had been selected for one of the cantonment areas. 2 weeks later, it was determined that it would be named Camp Meade, after the hero of Gettysburg, because the selectees that would be reporting here were from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. The 1st of July, the contract was let to construct the camp to prepare for 40,000 troops that would be coming in here to mobilize. On 1 September, the first selectees arrived. By 1 October, the camp was fully ready to receive 40,000 men and was now the 2nd largest city in Maryland. Pretty remarkable what can be achieved. That's in the great scheme of things, but again, put that in the context of those families trying to figure out what they were going to do with their lives as the whole world was being turned upside down around them. So we remember that and we celebrate that. Colonel Rickard talked about all the things that have happened since, but it all begins with those few months in 1917, and that's what we're here to remember today. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Phoebe McPherson of Epiphany Episcopal Church. I bet you've had to work hard to get that over the years. He's going to offer a brief history of this place, which holds a special spot as a partner with Fort Meade. Reverend McPherson.
Thank you. It will be brief. But I want to just take you back. This building was constructed in 60 days. There was a big urgency about World War I and about our deployment and preparedness. But anyway, it was built in 60 days. But I want to take you back just a moment. When I first arrived here 31 years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Tom McNamara. Tom McNamara's father was a doctor, the local doctor just across the track, and he was deployed, and he went to the trenches in France. And on November 11th, the church bell rang, and the train whistles blew, and I want to do that for you. Tom McNamara, who was 4 years old, his mother leaned out the window of their second story of their home, and said, "Your father's coming home. The war's over. Your father's coming home." And so she ran down the stairs. She grabbed her 4-year-old by the hand, dragged him down the street, across the railroad track, into that door, up to this altar rail, and they knelt and prayed and gave thanks to God that his father would be coming home. This place was a home away from home for thousands and thousands of young men and women who were deployed to the trenches in France. It's really kind of a goodbye chapel. It was built with bedrooms upstairs so that families, remember people didn't have cars, families who could get here could come and spend the night to say goodbye to their sons and daughters. So it's well prayed in, and I hope that you can feel the presence of those people. I feel it all the time. When we did the restoration, about 10 years ago now, we completed the restoration. I was afraid that feeling would leave, ghosts or whatever you want to call it, a spirit. And after it was over, I was so grateful that they are still here. So I hope that you'll be quiet in the space a little bit and take a tour and walk upstairs and see the way the community gathered together to support the people who were building up Camp Meade and going across the ocean to fight in a devastating war, the kind of sacrifices that they made. And yet they are the ones who turned the tide and made it possible for that war to end. So, I'm glad you're here. If you want to come back, and I think it's 2 weeks on Saturday, November 18th, I think it is, we have our annual Armistice Day tea. This year it's about a week late, but you're welcome to come to that tea. We do have tickets. And we'd be honored if you would come and have an Old English tea with us. One more thing. After being here 30-some years, I had never been to a World War I battlefield. So this past summer, I went to Belgium. And when I was there, I wanted to bring something home. We're redoing our cemetery as a Centennial Memorial Gardens, and we're going to have a monument there to commemorate World War I. And so I found these while I was there. They're made by Belgian blacksmiths for a monument that was dedicated in 2016 in Belgium to remember and honor the horses in World War I. So they're made by Belgian blacksmiths. And they needed 2016 of them, and they received 5,000 of them. Oh. So some are for sale, but 3 dozen. Probably going to buy some more. And they'll be incorporated into the monument that we construct this coming year in time for our centennial. And one last thing. I do hope that you'll take a look at our museum. It's a social history museum. I've always wanted one of these for the chapel, and I found one the other day and had it framed just yesterday. It's a house flag. There's a lot of talk about Gold Star families. Well, this is the house flag of World War I, meaning that somebody's son was deployed, and they hung this flag in the window. And if they received the news that no one wants to receive, then the flag was replaced with one with a gold star. So that traces back to World War I as well. So this was a home away from home for so many people, so I thought we'd better have a house flag. And so it will hang above the door. There's a news article that said that 4 of the 5 civilian chaplains who served in this place in 1918 enlisted and were deployed to France. And there was a house flag that hung on that wall with 4 stars. So we have that.
As we close our program, we're going to have a last musical selection, and then we'll join us for the cake cutting in the back.
Please rise.